Well, I love this question. I love imagining us and being and sort of arriving mentally and emotionally to the year 2030 when we're celebrating, because the media blitz will be a big party. We're in the streets, right? This is a party, and we deserve it. I agree with a lot of what my co-panelists have brought up, so I'm going to focus on a couple of main points. I believe that what we've done to reduce child maltreatment and intimate violence by this year include fully understanding the nature and impact of abuse, violence, and other kinds of trauma, that we actually know the intimate, gritty, nasty impacts from a physical, psychological, emotional, mental, spiritual levels, that we have a very good understanding of it. And that's going to require us to have the capacity to tolerate the pain of knowing those things. So we got to do something to get that capacity. The place we'll focus all of our energy, resources, whether it's the University of Oregon or everyone in this room, I believe that will get us the farthest is on what healing looks like. Not only do we really need to understand the nitty-gritty of the damage that gets done and the impact and the layers of it, but we really need to focus our understanding and our brilliance on seeing and understanding and appreciating what healing actually looks like. And we know it. Some of us know it really intimately, what the process looks like, what the path looks like, all of the variety of culturally specific, individually tailored, community level kinds of supports and efforts and activities that lead to healing. The impacts, as I said, related to child abuse and intimate violence are physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual. We've historically, all the way through the year 2011, 2012 maybe, we're starting to make a turn. Most of our thinking and work has historically focused on managing those impacts. Managing the impacts, including behavioral management, symptom management, medication, sort of creating frameworks for suppressing in some ways the natural outcomes of violence and abuse, whether it's criminality or substance abuse or reenacting violence in our own families. A lot of our work has been, and rightfully so, understandably so, on sort of stopping that, right? But thankfully, what we now know is that, in fact, for people to completely recover and heal, we actually have to support and allow and understand processing. We have to understand processing from trauma, processing from violence in all of the ways we all get squirrely and uncomfortable about, because it's not fun. It's not where we want to go. But we now understand and are happier about the fact that physical activity and movement can play a huge role. We know this partly because if you bother to really listen to survivors who are often thought of as lacking insight, what you'll hear is wisdom because they've done the work and healed. We also learn from survivors that haven't healed, what hasn't worked, what's not working, what's not getting us to the outcome of healing and functioning. I believe Jeff maybe will tell you about some of the calls that he's gotten from people who are actually really offended at the idea that we possibly can heal. It's scary to people who are at the end of their lives sometimes, or who've lost people, to think that we've blown it, right? It's painful. We also understand not only that physical movement and activity can support healing, but so can emotional processing that is expressive. Art, music, sort of emotive processing can be really powerful. And again, we've actually moved away from some of what some of our historical and cultural communities have known for a long time, that collective processing, that sharing and a healing publicly. You know, we kind of go to those vigils after somebody's been killed because of domestic violence, and the community is pretty small standing around holding those candles. And sometimes we feel a little bit silly about that, or at least ineffective. But what it actually does is it allows us to acknowledge and process together something that is publicly impacting us. And we've gone away from creating public spaces where we can do that. And we also have brilliant models for how we can come back to them in lots of our communities. We have histories of understanding how to help people heal. We also need to address the spiritual aspects of healing, addressing the belief systems and religious doctrine that actually collude with inequality, address those within our religious and faith traditions, and also use that spiritual connection to move through our healing process and to support it and identify how people can use it as individuals. So let's move out sort of ecologically. Now that we know that trauma and violence and child abuse and intimate personal violence impact not only individuals but also families and whole communities, we know that we've learned that we need to address them kind of collectively at the family level and support the families. We also know that the family system is deeply damaged by the reenactment of intergenerational violence, or even when there's one person in the household that's got a history of violence that they live with and haven't resolved. We know that people who have trauma histories parent differently, function differently, connect differently, make love differently, raise their children differently, teach their children differently. We have to be supported as individuals with trauma histories to tend to and be healed from our own childhood histories, which means we have to remember and tend to it and go through the pain of it. Not fun, but can be actually very joyful and very powerful if done in connection. I'm not talking about go off and do it in your car. I'm talking about in community, supported by community. In order to do that, what we've had to do is we've had to develop wraparound support for the whole family that tends to everybody's individual needs and the dynamic relationships between every two people. We know that when a parent has experienced domestic violence, that they may not reenact or expose their children to it, but that their children may have violence going on between them that parent can't intervene with. So we're talking about sibling to sibling. We're talking about grandparent to grandchild. We're talking about parent to child and to their own older adult parent, right? We know that those pair relationships warrant consideration, and we're tending to them. We also, like several other panelists have mentioned, we have taken care of the issue of a lack of basic needs. People have housing and transportation and education and access to health care, and it's not a dilemma anymore. It's just a done deal. We've arranged ourselves around taking care of families and the basic needs. At the community level, we know that trauma and violence, whether it's passed down individually within families or whether it's historical because of genocide that's happened to whole collectives of people that are now living among us, breathing among us, that we know that as a community we are all impacted by each other's pain and each other's trauma, and whether we're talking about racism or homophobia or sexism, that happens collectively and is still woven within the fabric of our communities and supported within our institutions in 2011. We have cleaned that up. We have uprooted it, we have looked at it, we've sat together with each other's pain. We who are in privileged positions, who have not been impacted because we're not on that side of the dynamic, get better and have gotten better at listening to the pain of our brothers and sisters who have gone through pain at the hands of our ancestors. And we just deal with it. We just deal with it. Men get better at listening to women's pain and violence that has been perpetrated against them by other men. And if that man is the one that's perpetuated the violence directly, they get better at listening and supporting the healing of the people in their families and in their communities that they have hurt. And we know how to do this. We know how to train people how to do it. We know how to support people to deal with their own processing. And we have the support systems in place within our systems to make sure it doesn't stop when we get to the hard spots. So the university, I just love this part of the question. The university is a hotbed. It is a resource-rich, research-rich, funding-rich group, collective organization that right now in 2011 has been a little bit separate from the needs of the community in some pretty significant ways. There are some programs that started 10 years ago, 20 years ago that are beginning to change that. But by 2030, what we have is an active, vibrant community campus partnership that uses the best and the brightest minds that we have in our community and directs them squarely at making Eugene and Springfield the best, safest, most creative collective of people on the planet. We use our research resources at the University of Oregon to make sure that we understand not only the impact and the problems that we have in our communities, but to really understand and to share the knowledge about what works, what helps, what makes us healthy and allows us to heal. We train the best and the brightest activists, teachers, community organizers, scientists in every discipline to take up their role as active, engaged community healing, supporting people. Everybody that walks out of this university. And we rally and harness the ever-present human resource power that is at this university on campus 9 months a year. And that group of students, many of whom are survivors, many of whom have healed and are doing better in their own lives, who have a ton to offer in this process, all arrange them in this brilliant class that gets started in the spring of 2011 to rally every bit and harness every bit of energy that's available within this population to achieve this very achievable